Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we're going to talk about rereading and DNFing. Recently, I have been chatting with some booktubers and on sprints and just on my channel. There has been a constant conversation around rereading and DNFing. And I wanted to just give you guys my criteria for when I decide to reread a book and when I decide to DNF a book. I know that both of these are very, I think, polarizing for people. I think some people love to reread, some people hate it. Some people absolutely DNF whenever they need to, and other people will not. They're completists and they have to finish the books that they start reading. And so I think it's really interesting to kind of dive into people's reasonings behind each. So yeah, I just wanted to sit down and have a chat with you guys. So if you have your own reasons for why you decide to reread a book or DNF a book, let me know in the comments down below. Do you reread books? Do you DNF books? Yeah, let me know what your habits are in reading. I will start with my criteria for rereading books. So if I reread a book, it is probably because I have enjoyed the book, but I did split my reasoning into 3 different categories. The first reason that I have for rereading is if it's in a series and there is a new book coming out. So the biggest series I think I've done this with has been the Stormlight Archive, which I'm not going to get all of these down, but I reread the first 3 in preparation to read Rhythm of War. And the main reason I reread this series is because each of the books is very lengthy. I think the shortest book is the first one, Way of Kings, and I can't remember if it's really close to 1,000 pages or if it's slightly over. But regardless, each book is chunky, it has a lot of details, and I just wanted to go into the 4th book fresh, and I just feel like that helps my enjoyment of a series, and I don't mind rereading those books because I love them. The Way of Kings I've reread so many times because it's kind of a comfort read for me at this point. I also have reread Mask of Mirrors and The Liar's Knot in preparation for The Labyrinth's Heart, and so it is just something I do enjoy doing, which is one of the reasons that I own a lot of the series that I have, because even if I've finished a series, I kind of still enjoy diving back into that world, and it's just fun to have the next book ready for you, especially if it's a series that I've loved. The second reason that I reread is books that are always on my mind. So this does kind of lean itself back into some of the series that I've done or that I've read. I am currently rereading Lies of Locke Lamora because I'm rereading the Gentleman Bastard series, which is not complete, and I don't know if there's another book that is going to come out anytime soon, but I just was constantly reminded of how much I enjoyed the series, and I had started to forget details, and so I wanted to go back in and reread. But a book does not have to be in a series for me to love it. I recently reread The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue because that book is just something that always pops up into my mind. That book is one of the reasons I started my booktube channel. It got me into reading. That was the first book that I read in, I think it was 2020, when I made my decision that I was going to read 52 books that year. And before that, I have always enjoyed reading, but I was reading like maybe 10 to 20 books a year, maybe. And I really thought, like, I can do this. Like, I can set aside time. I can be intentional about my reading. And that was the first book of that journey. And so it means a lot to me. And so I do always think about it. But I want to say that this particular category, it's always on my mind. It's not always that I've loved it, because there's a book I really want to reread, and I rated it 3 stars the first time I read it. And that is Driftwood by Marie Brennan, which is an author that I have enjoyed. Marie Brennan wrote the A Natural History of Dragons, so the Lady Trent series is what I'm trying to get at. So Marie Brennan wrote this, and then she also participated in a author collaboration on the Rook and the Rose series as well. And so it's an author that I've enjoyed, and I read Driftwood, which has a really interesting premise. If you haven't heard of it, it's essentially about the place that you're at has a whole bunch of worlds that collide together and are essentially slowly dying and collapsing into nothingness. And so all these worlds have all these worlds and people are having to live amongst people that were never on their planet to begin with. It's very interesting. But it's a book that when I read it, I think I was just expecting something different, but it is something that pops up into my mind all of the time. And I think I need to reread it. So that's another reason for rereading. My third reason for rereading is questions and theories. So this is one that I think has most recently come up into my world, and I think it's because of two specific books that were recommended to me by Michaela Reads, both of these. One of them is Sundial, which I recently talked about in my wrap-up and also in my recent horror reads video as well. So I won't talk about like the premise or anything here, but that book in general had so many little clues throughout the book that I feel like I need to go back and read, because I think the second time through I'm going to catch more detail, which is true for a lot of books. But there are so many things that I question that I need to figure out in that book. The second book that I kind of think about with this is Death in Her Hands. And this book, it wasn't so much that I was questioning things. I think I need to revisit what I believe is actually going on in this book, which isn't going to make any sense unless I guess you've read this book. But it was kind of just a trippy, like, is this really what we're doing type of a book? And I would like to reread it knowing where the book goes and then seeing if I get anything else out of it. I also think this way about Haunting of Hill House, which is another book that Michaela Reads loved, and a lot of people have recommended that book to me in general. But and I was excited to read another Shirley Jackson. But that is another book that I have a lot of questions, and I want to see some details that I might have missed throughout, and maybe just I think I want to annotate that one as well, which this is not a category of rereading, but that is another reason that I want to reread, is to annotate my books, because I am new to annotations, and so I think that rereading is going to give me the ability to actually catch things because I know what I'm looking for. And so Haunting of Hill House, I would like to go through and highlight different things that happen that might help me piece some things together that I have theories over. So those are my general reasons for rereading, but I also wanted to give you guys some reasoning as well, just general information for people on some things that I've noticed while I reread, that if you have never given rereading a shot, maybe this will make you make that decision, but no pressure if that's just not something you enjoy. One of those is nostalgia or like a comfort read. If I am having a hard time and I am having a hard time focusing, especially, I don't necessarily want to read a new book because that might impact my understanding and my enjoyment of that book. And so if I reread something that I already know that I've loved, I already have the story, especially if I'm listening to it on audio, it's okay if I zone out for a little bit. It's okay for me to like decompress while I'm reading the book because I already know the storyline. So if that's something that you find that maybe you're feeling a little anxious about life in general and you're having a really hard time focusing on books, maybe pick up an old classic that you've read in the past, and it'll help kind of calm your mind a little bit. Another reason to reread is if you're having a reading slump. I tell people all the time that my way of getting out of reading slumps is to pick up an old favorite. And that's partially because of what I mentioned with the nostalgic comfort reads, is it does kind of allow me to get out of my own head and not have to focus so much. But it also, you know that you're going to enjoy it because you've enjoyed it before. I guess that's not like a 100% guarantee, but most of the time I'm going to enjoy my rereads. And I don't know, it allows me to take, this is going to sound really cheesy, but it kind of gives me a hand up out of the reading slump. Like, this is a hobby that you enjoy. It kind of reminds me of the reasons that I love to read. And I guess I feel like the pressure is kind of taken off because it's a reread. And yeah, it's helped me get out of a lot of reading slumps. With that, I will add that if you are going to reread a favorite, I would suggest getting it in a different format. So if your favorites come in audio, if they come in an ebook, if they come in a physical book, read it in a way that you haven't in the past, because I have found, especially if I read the physical copy first and I can read the audiobook or vice versa, it adds so much more texture to a story, and I've really enjoyed that aspect of rereading. So I would just give that a try. And the third reason, I have actually not tried yet, but I am intrigued with the thought. I would like to reread with a buddy. Not necessarily that I have to have that buddy have already read the book, which I would be fine with as well, but I almost think it would be fun to reread a book with someone who has read it who is reading it for the first time. So I can kind of experience them reading, especially if it's one of my favorites. I can experience them reading it for the first time. I can talk through my rereading experience with them. I can kind of, I think it would be hard as well, because you'd have to like gauge your reactions, because you know what's going to happen in the book. But I don't know. I think it could be a really fun experience to get to reread a book with a buddy. Next, let's talk about DNFing. So I think this one's probably a little bit more polarizing than rereads, but that's okay. I have 3 kind of categories for why I DNF books. So the first of those is boredom. If I am not enjoying myself, I absolutely will put down a book. I've kind of always been this way, but I do think that I've gotten more deliberate with it recently, and it's because my want to read list is so large that if I am not enjoying a book, it's really hard for me to press on whenever I can see 100 other titles that I would rather be reading, and I know I'm not enjoying myself. I will give a book a fair try, so most of the time, I'm not gonna read the first page of a book and say, nope, this isn't for me. A lot of times I give it 10%, but really it just depends on the book. Some books I've given 250 pages. Looking at you, Jonathan Strange. Some books I have stopped after a couple of pages. That doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while I will just know, like, the writing style of this isn't for me, or like something will happen that's a little triggering, and I'll put it down. But most of the time I give a book at least 10% to figure out, okay, this book is definitely not my jam. Sometimes I'll go and look at like reviews and see like, is this something, I try not to look at spoilers because I don't want to spoil myself, but I will look at what does someone not enjoy about this. And if I think that it's something that I'm seeing over and over again that's really pushing down my enjoyment of a book, I'll definitely decide to DNF. Next, I kind of already talked about this in the previous one. I kind of folded it in with some of my reasonings for being bored and like DNFing within the first couple of pages. It's if something is triggering. So I don't have a ton of things that I won't read, but something I really have found that I don't enjoy is terminal illness in any form, unless it's done very, very carefully. There have been a couple of books that have handled terminal illness in a way that I can, especially if it's on page, but I don't do well with that. And so the Traveling Cat Chronicles is a book that I tried to read a long time ago, and I went into that book blind. I just knew that it was about a cat, and he was traveling around with his owner. I did not realize that there is terminal illness in that book, and as soon as I found out, I can't remember how far I was pretty far into the book though, and I had suspicions early on that something like that was happening, but I was really hoping that it would be something else, and I just couldn't do it. It colored the book for me in a way that I just wasn't enjoying it anymore, and so that is something that I will put a book down for. So, and I would encourage you to do the same. If you have something that you know instantly turns your mind in a bad way, I would recommend not pushing through that, but I mean, that's up to you and what your comfort level is with that. But that is a reason for me to not continue a book. The third reason for me is that it's just not the right time. These are soft DNFs, and I recently, actually, I had one of these. I soft DNF'd The Bandit Queens, and it wasn't because I didn't enjoy what I was reading, but I had just read a book that was very similar. Not in premise, but with, like, culturally speaking, and some of the aspects of the women in the book and the relationships of the women. there was a book that I had read, The Djinn Waits 100 Years, that I found was very similar. And I was having a hard time, one, separating the books, but also keeping engaged in the story because I had just finished a book that was like that. And so yeah, I think that sometimes I do, when I get into a book, if I've read something similar to it recently, or if I know like maybe it's really depressing and I'm having a hard time in life dealing with certain things, maybe that's not the right time for me to read that book. If something is maybe a little tense, if it's dark and I'm just not in the mood for a horror read. If I want something more light and fluffy, I will put something down to pick up another book that I'm more in the mood for. And that's kind of the mood reader in me. I can force myself through books, but I think that's a little unfair to the book. And so that is my third and final reason that I will DNF a book. And for my general reasons for you guys, the main one is just time. There are so many books out there, like I said, that I would like to read. If I am not jiving with a book, I'm gonna move on. And I know that some people, that's not a thing. You have to finish a book once you've started it because you either want to know how it ends or you just feel, I don't know, I guess obligated to complete the story. That's absolutely fine. I know like in my head, I'm just thinking there's so little time, so many books, I need to move on. And lastly, to tie into that, there's so little time, so many books. If you're not enjoying a book, I would say move on, give yourself a little grace. It could be for any of the reasons that I've listed, for any of the categories that I personally have for my DNFs, but also just maybe a book's just not meant for you, and that's okay. Maybe a book's not meant for you right now in your life, and that's okay. So I know that it breaks some of your guys' hearts not to be able to finish the books that you've started, but I have found it freeing personally. I have found that it helps my enjoyment of my other books because I am not forcing myself through an experience that I don't enjoy. It's almost like, this is going to sound really bad, but like you're training yourself to love reading, which we already do. But if I train myself in a way that I am forcing myself to read books that I don't enjoy, sometimes my mind, whenever I pick up a book, is going to think this is going to be a negative experience. Whereas if I DNF a book I'm not enjoying, every book I pick up, I'm just going to think, I'm going to love it. That's what I think. What is that, Pavlov's dog? That kind of thing. Yeah, so that's another reason, I guess, to DNF. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys have other reasons for rereading or for DNFing books. If you don't reread or don't DNF books, I would love to chat with you guys in the comments about these two things just to get your perspective on things. Do you agree with the categories that I've made? Do you have other categories or other criteria that you use for rereading and DNFing? I would love to chat. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.